Welcome to Fabula Celtica, a Celtic Studies podcast with Tyler Baxter. Season 1, Ancient Ireland. Episode 12, Law and Order, Royal Victims Unit. In the early Irish legal system, offences against just kingship are considered especially heinous. In the Kingdom of Ulster, the dedicated podcasters who investigate these vicious violations are members of an elite squad known as the Royal Victims Unit. These are their stories. Good news, lads. We've got that detestable Eka Bailblitha on the run. Lads, what's wrong with ye? We should be celebrating. Pull it together, Dorn. We'll avenge father. That's right. Prince Assel will help us, won't you, Prince? Please, Prince. Help us, Prince. What's this now? He killed grandfather. Who? Who else but that wretched Echa Belvedere? Alas, fair Dorn, my heart breaks for you, and for your brothers and your son. Echa Belvedere has done my father many an injury too, but the loss of your father, Bwitha, is a grievous blow indeed. Come, sons and grandsons of Bwitha, we shall pursue this upstart claimant to the kingship over the Fena of Tara on my honour as son of the indomitable Con Caedcathach, Tara's rightful king. Prince Assel, did you see where the coward fled? Aye, he fled north, towards the territory of the Ulstermen, the territory of Fergus McLeod. Welcome back to Fabula Celtica. Our opening today was, well, I hope you appreciated the conceit, but the story that this comes from is a tale known as the Saga of Fergus McLeod. And the beginning of this tale I've rather dramatized and elaborated. We have reference to Con Caedcathach, who we have met before, Con of the 100 Battles, one of the many legendary kings of Tara, the legendary progenitor of the Enail clan, the powerful clan that controlled much of Ireland throughout a large chunk of the Middle Ages. And at the beginning of the Saga of Fergus McLeod, Con Caedcathach is contending with Echa Bailblitha, or Echa of the Yellow Lips, or they're contending for the kingship of the Fena of Tara, this group of people within Ireland, this large tuath, I suppose, or large group of people united under a single over-kingship. I suppose it's perhaps a group of tuatha that include this larger group known as the Fena. So in our last episode, we talked about how early Ireland, medieval Ireland, was, according to D.A. Binchy, tribal, hierarchical, rural, and familiar. And this tribal aspect is coming in here. We have the Fena of Tara, this group that is under a king of Tara, but the kingship is in dispute. It's in dispute between Con and Echa. At the beginning of this story, Echa is said to have done many injuries to Con during this contention. Those injuries are not specified, but the implication based on later happenings in the text is that one of the things Echa, or one of Echa's allies, seems to have done is to have killed Con's close ally, Bwitha, or perhaps have killed a close kinsman of Bwitha. because eventually Echa himself is slain by Witha's sons and grandson. So the fact that Witha's sons and grandsons go after Echa in particular suggests that Witha in some way has been part of the collateral damage that Echa has wrought on Con and his allies. Now, again, it's not entirely clear what injuries Echa specifically committed. This is all implied. But we can say that Echa is said to eventually flee from this contention with Con and seek protection under Fergus, the King of Ulster, at Evenvacha. Echa and his allies flee to seek protection from Fergus, the King of Ulster, at Evenvacha, and Fergus agrees to give them protection while they recuperate and try to gather new forces for returning to contending with Con for the kingship over the Fena. But while under Fergus's legal protection, Echa is killed in vengeance for his various injuries committed against Con by 6 different people. One is Assel, the son of Con Cédchathach. So this is the Prince Assel of the skit at the beginning of the episode. Also involved are Witha's 4 sons. So according to the skit at the beginning, which creative license, these sons are taking vengeance for the killing of their father is sort of what the story implies, though it doesn't say it directly. And finally, in the skit at the beginning, we had a woman by the name of Dorn, who is the sister of Witha's son, so Witha's daughter. And she doesn't take place in the killing, but she has a son. She has a son who is therefore Witha's grandson. And he's a particularly interesting situation because he is the son of Dorn with an outsider to the Tuath. In our previous episode, when we were talking about hierarchy, we mentioned that except in certain cases, such as professionals that would travel around like clerics, usually when you move outside of a Tuath, you lose all legal standing. So the fact that Dorn has a son with an outsider means that she is actually the person legally responsible for her son rather than his father, which is going to be important in a short while. Fergus is a king. His legal protection has been violated by the slaying of Echa, and so he is entitled to seek compensation for this violation of his legal protection. And so he amasses his forces and goes after the perpetrators. He eventually corners them, and they agree to pay compensation for having violated Fergus's legal protection. Because Fergus is a king, his honor price is quite steep. He has an honor price of 7 covels, which each of the violators must pay, or rather each group of violators must pay. So Assel, son of Con Cédchathach, pays mostly in land worth 7 covels. The 4 sons of Witha also pay 7 covels. And then the grandson of Witha, by Dorn and that outsider to the Tuath, is considered a separate case because of his parentage. And he is expected to pay 7 covels, but he does not turn up to make good on his debt. Dorn herself cannot afford this debt either, and because she is the one who is legally responsible for her son, not his father, who is an outsider to the Tuath, she is the one legally responsible. She is the one who has to pay up. She can't afford to, and so instead, she is taken as a covel herself, which, if you remember from the last episode, means a female slave or a bondmaid. So she becomes essentially a hostage in place of the monetary or resource value that she cannot afford to pay. After these events, Fergus makes a treaty with the Fena of Tara. Remember, Fergus is the king of Ulster, so he's the king of the Ulstermen, of the Ulydd. And so these are a different group than the Fena of Tara. Presumably, there would be multiple Tuatha under Fergus in the province of Ulster, multiple Tuatha, which consist of people known in a collective as the Ulydd. There's going to be multiple Tuatha, multiple tribes or petty kingdoms, with multiple kings who are under the overking of Tara, who at this point has come to be Con Céad Cathach. Now the Echa Bealmhíde has been slain. Con has uncontested kingship. And so there's a treaty made between the Ulydd and the Fena, between Fergus and Con, so that future cross-Tuath disputes can be settled purely by legal processes and diplomacy rather than by force of arms. Next time they have this agreement made so that Fergus won't have to muster his army to come after offenders against his legal protection, and similar eventualities will be resolved purely legally. So, yay, no more illegal regicide, hopefully, from there forward between Ulster and Tara. We're going to return to this story throughout the episode and get it in bits. It's quite a complicated story, and it's got a lot of legal ideas within it. So we'll be bouncing back and forth between that and the various historical and legal ideas that surround kingship in medieval Ireland. Recall from the last episode that there was no system of coinage in medieval Ireland, at least in early medieval Ireland. Coins did come into use in, say, port towns on the east and south coasts as you get trade with the continent, but in general in Ireland, coins weren't really a circulating method of currency. Instead, values that were owed were noted in combinations of various units that were equated to different types of cattle, mostly, or various amounts of silver. So, for example, a covel, originally meaning the female slave, was also a unit of value that was worth approximately 3 milch cows, or 3 ounces of silver. 1 milch cow was worth 1 ounce of silver, according to glossaders, and a yearling bullock was worth 1/8 of a milch cow, for instance. Currencies seem to have been largely interchangeable, as I mentioned before in the last episode as well. So you could be owed a yearling heifer or its equivalent value in silver. But sometimes particular processes or fines specified a particular variety of payment, such as you must pay cattle or you must pay silver. Also, as mentioned last episode, there must have been some fluctuation in relative values of currency between, say, cattle and silver. You're going to have the glossaders who say that 1 milch cow is worth 1 ounce of silver, is worth 2 shades, is worth 1/3 of a covel. But if you have a cattle plague, or if you have a scarcity of one type of resource or the other, that type of resource is going to increase in relative value. With all that being said, we also in the previous episode talked about honor price and how your particular rank within the hierarchy is given a financial value known as the log nenech, or the honor price. There are different levels of kingship. There is the basic Rí Tuatha, or the king of 1 Tuath, who has an honor price set at 7 covels. There are kings of a small number of Tuatha, say 3 to 4, known as the Great King or the King of Multiple Tuatha, who would have an honor price of 8 covels, so 24 milch cows. You've got kings of provinces, entire provinces, so the King of Ulster or the King of Connacht, And these would have an honor price of 14 covels, so about twice the honor price of the king of a single tuath. And then you've got the legendary King of all Ireland, the Rí Éireann. But since this is a legendary title, there's no honor price that we can give for this particular level of king. It simply never existed. In order to become a king, there are certain expectations. There is a strong association presented in the sources that suggest that just kingship was associated with prosperity and fertility of the land. We get this connection between injustice and infertility of the land as well. This ties back, of course, to our episode Interview with a Goddess, where we looked at the legendary depictions of how a king was given a spiritual right to kingship through the union with or drink poured by a sovereignty goddess. But that idea of sexual union with the sovereignty goddess in particular can be thought of as union with the land, and a king can only make the land fertile through justice, not through injustice. Law texts list many examples that are deemed to be breaches of the king's justice. For example, Fingal, which we mentioned in the previous episode as well, the idea of kinslaying. If you are a king who commits kinslaying, then you are violating the king's justice. That is going to be reason to depose you. It's going to be reason why the land suddenly becomes barren, why disasters strike, why things are going to start falling apart. Extortion is also highly frowned upon, for example. And there are plenty of ways that a king can violate the king's justice. To be a king, you also have to act like a king. You are not allowed to perform manual labor because this will reduce your honor price to the honor price of a commoner. Back in one of our early episodes, I believe episode 2, we were looking at the Lever Gavla and the third taking of Ireland by Nevydd, whose name, by the way, is the same name that we have for the rank of nobles in Ireland, the Nevydd class. But Nevydd, the character in the Lever Gavla, he battled with and took captive these Fóvera who had attacked his people, and he forced them to dig the foundations of a fort. So he forced them to conduct manual labor. This would cause them to lose status, because by engaging with manual labor, they're reducing themselves down to the level of a basic laborer, and so they're going to lose their status as a result. The king is always accompanied by a retinue. If he goes out hunting by himself, for instance, he loses his honor price, he loses his status, therefore he loses his kingship. So he must be accompanied by a retinue, he must behave as a king does. He cannot default on an oath that he makes. He cannot tolerate a satire. There are processes for legal and illegal satire, which I will talk about when we look at poets. But a satire legally conducted against a king has to be dealt with using the proper legal channels, or that king is liable to lose his honor price and lose his status. The king must ensure that his subjects carry out their duties. Okay, so again, he has to behave as a king. He has to fulfill his role. One of those ideas that I mentioned back in episode 10 about the law text and whether or not we can always trust them is that one of the other expectations of kingship is that a king cannot be defeated in battle. This is one of those ones where we go, but is that practical? Is it realistic that a king is going to be done away with every time he loses a battle? Maybe, but it seems unlikely that that's going to happen in every case, especially a smaller skirmish. So this one probably had some degree of flexibility to it. Another really interesting one that probably wasn't entirely practical, but is really important in legendary texts in particular, is the idea that a king cannot be physically blemished in any way. And this is going to turn up in the Saga of Fergus as we continue. Within the Saga of Fergus McLeod, we have what to me reads as sort of a Irish precursor to the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, which many of you are probably familiar with. So I think you'll see the similarities as we go through. After all these events dealing with the fallout of Echa Belved's slaying while under Fergus's legal protection and the subsequent fines that the offenders had to pay to Fergus, entirely separately from that, Fergus is going out one day and he decides to take a nap by the local loch, the local lake, a place called Loch Ruthriga. And he is almost drowned as he is lying there. He's got his charioteer with him, so he's got something of a retinue. Maybe he's got some other people close by, but he's out just chilling by the lake. He decides to take a nap. And while he is out lazing by the lake, taking his nap, several diminutive people who are called the Lucherpon in the text, which should sound a lot like leprechaun. These Lugerpon come out and they try to start dragging him into the water because they think it's going to be really fun to just drown this guy who's taken a nap. Well, he does wake up before they manage to submerge him, and with his superior strength, he goes and he catches 3 of them, one in each hand and one against his chest. And when they ask to be released, he only will allow them to go if they do him a favor. And so one asks him what he wants, and he says, I want to be able to breathe underwater like you do. He's seen them. He's seen that they have emerged from this lake. So the Lugerpon tells him, all right, I'll give you a method for being able to breathe underwater, and you can go anywhere you want except in this lake right here. If you go in this lake right here, bad things are going to happen, so don't do it. Fergus agrees to this, so he swears an oath that he will not go into this lake. The Lugerpon give him these special herbs, and they say, stick these herbs in your ears, and you will be able to breathe underwater. So, lovely image this. Fergus sticks these ear herbs in, and he starts going around all sorts of places in Ireland, checking out all the underwater sites. And it works great. He's able to explore underwater, no bother. Can breathe underwater as long as he has these herbs in his ears. But eventually, he gets to the point where he can't repress his curiosity about what is under his own local lake, Ruthriga. And so, in spite of his oath to the Lugerpon, in spite of the warning they have given him, he goes into the lake, and there he finds this terrifying monster. The monster is described as inflating and deflating, like lungs contracting, or a balloon, some sort of strange monstrosity. But whatever this thing is, it is so terrifying that his face wrenches into this expression of terror. And when he flees and emerges from the lake, this look of terror is still plastered to his face. And no matter what anyone does, they can't get his face to return to normal. His face is just stuck in this position of utter fear and terror. And so this is a blemish on his physical appearance. And a blemish means that he shouldn't be the king anymore. But his charioteer, when he realizes this is what's going on, at first he admits to Fergus, oh, yeah, your face looks a little messed up right now. It looks pretty scared, king, but I'm sure if you take a nap, it will be better after a little sleep. And when Fergus decides, okay, that's a good idea, and he goes to sleep, the charioteer scumpers off to the various people in the court of Ulster, and they all consult together, and the charioteer is like, I don't think his face is actually going to go back to normal. Our king is blemished, guys. What do we do? And so they're all actually quite happy with Fergus as their king. They don't want to get rid of him in spite of this blemish. And so they decide, we're going to just make sure that he is never made aware of this blemish. We're going to get rid of all the gossipers in the court. We're going to dismiss them. We are going to get rid of any reflective surfaces. We are going to make sure that when his hair is washed, that his hair is washed when he is face up so he doesn't see his reflection in the water. And in this way, we will make sure he doesn't even realize he's got this permanent facial blemish, and that way he can remain our king. If you'll recall, one of the groups of people who killed Echa at the beginning of the story and who had to pay Fergus compensation for this was Dorn's son, or Witha's grandson. But he skipped out, and so Dorn was taken as a covel, as a bondmaid or female slave, in his place because she couldn't pay up. And she was legally responsible for her son, who was born to an outsider. It happens to be that Dorn is the person who washes Fergus's hair. So she is this noble woman. She has been taken into service. No doubt she's unhappy about this. She's of the Fani of Tara. She is of Concaedhox people, and she's being held hostage, essentially, to pay off her debt, or her son's debt, really, for violating Fergus's legal protection at the beginning of the tale. And one day, she is preparing to wash his head, and she has been following what she's been told. She's been making sure that he doesn't see his reflection in the water. She's been having him face up when he puts his head back into the water for her to wash. But Fergus thinks she is being too slow about getting ready to wash his hair on this particular occasion, and so he whips her. She lashes out at him in anger and in pain, no doubt, for this. She's, again, a noble woman. She's not used to being treated this way. And so she lashes out at him by mocking his blemished face, which is the first time anyone has made him aware of this since his face was twisted in terror by visiting this monster under the lake. He is enraged by this, and so he kills Dorn in his rage. He is able to see his blemished face in the basin that she has prepared, and still infuriated, he takes up his sword and he goes to battle the creature underneath Loch Ruthriga. In this ferocious battle, he manages to emerge victorious, but after emerging from the lake, he drops dead from the effort that it took him to slay this creature. There's a little bit more to the story, but let's go ahead and look at how this ties into kingship in terms of the king's role in enforcing the law. D.A. Binchy, in his article Secular Institutions, says, "The king was not a legislator in the sense that he could create new law or repeal existing law. In other words, the king is someone who enforces law, but he is not a law creator. He is not someone who changes the laws of the Tuath. Within the Tuath, even in cases as extreme as murder, the king seems to rarely take part in legal proceedings. And when he does take part, this seems to be in a mostly ceremonial capacity. The methods of enforcing law, in general, are through processes of surety in which people willingly put up their property, their honor, or themselves to guarantee something to someone. You can pledge an object of value for a fixed period into someone else's custody, essentially giving them a hostage in material form or collateral. Or you can distrain property, which is a formal seizure of someone else's property on the basis that they owe you something, and so you're going to hold this property of theirs until they pay up. In the law text Crith Gavlach, kings specifically are said to enforce certain emergency ordinances. So pledging, suretyship, and distraint are all processes that can be enacted by anyone with legal entitlement. Kings have these emergency powers that can be put in place in times of crisis. And kings can enforce their ordinances of both secular and ecclesiastical law by taking pledges from their subjects. Kings also seem to have jurisdiction over matters of public security. So if there are brigands in the Tuath, they have authority to get people on dealing with that. They have the Brith of Tuatha, the judge or the jurist of the Tuath, to aid them in dealing with legal judgments. The king will have his own clients, who are, again, this idea of clientship is where someone below you, a farmer for instance, contracts with a lord or king to gain some amount of material resource from that lord or king, such as cattle, and in exchange the client pays back the lord or king in food rent and labor. Kings would have clients that are his dependents. If you're a client, you're a dependent to the person you're in a clientship with. So he would be responsible for making legal decisions for his clients and would expect to be just in that decision making. The king is also by default the person in the Tuath who is responsible for any people of dependent status who do not have an immediate superior. So if you are a child who is still of a dependent age, but your parents and grandparents and other members of your king group are not available or not alive to care for you, then it is the king who is responsible for you, for instance. Most authors of law texts expect that the king observe the law. The king is not above the law. But there are some difficulties with this. As I was explaining in the previous episode when talking about honor price and talking about hierarchy, because the honor price of a king is so high, it would be extremely difficult for someone to, say, go surety against the king. It would be extremely difficult for someone of lower rank to pay up for a king's honor price. It would be equally difficult for them to get a king to take them seriously if their honor price is so low relative to his wealth that he can commit an offense, pay for it, and then commit the offense again because he's got plenty of money to spare. So there's this issue of holding the king to account. To make that issue even more apparent, kings would often have what is known as a substitute churl, who's sort of the king's legal whipping boy. And if the king does wrong and he has a substitute churl, the plaintiff will actually enact various legal proceedings against the substitute churl instead of against the king directly. So, for example, the plaintiff can go and distrain the property of the substitute churl, but can't distrain the property of the king himself. And so in this way, the king is insulated from a lot of legal proceedings. The law texts do not really detail how much of the law kings followed in reality. It's hard to imagine, for instance, that kings would follow laws against cattle raiding. We have an entire genre of medieval Irish literature known as cattle raids, tonbo. There are multiple tonbo stories that exist, and even where we've lost the story, sometimes we still have the title. Again, we're going to look at the Saga of Fergus, and we're going to look at how it wraps up. And then we're going to look at the story as a whole and how it reflects these various legal processes that take place within it. After Fergus has died in his battle with this water monster, the Faena of Tara seek the Eric fine, the body fine, due for Fergus killing Dorn. Because remember, Dorn, even though she was taken by Fergus as a slave in order to make up for the fact that her son couldn't pay up or wouldn't pay up, even though that's the case, Dorn was originally a noblewoman of the Faena. And because Fergus has signed a treaty with the Faena of Tara, he has violated that peace treaty by killing her. To the credit of the Ulstermen, their king has just died. And so maybe it's not top of mind to pay up for killing Dorn. They're still trying to get their new king sorted out, all that sort of thing. But Con Cade Cathoc's people are having none of this. They don't want to wait for their payment to be due. The treaty has been violated, so they're going to take this into their own hands. And so Ossel, the son of Con Cade Cathach, comes and distrains 3 cows from the King of Ulster's property when the fine doesn't get paid. There's a problem with this, though, because he takes 3 cows that have calved, and he does not take the calves with him. This makes the 3 cows that he distrains very unhappy and very upset that they've been separated from their little baby calves, and so they break out of the enclosure he creates for them, and they return to Ulster. So he goes back to Ulster and he distrains the cows again, but this time he takes their calves with them. And the text explains that this is a re-seizure, a retaking, which gives us the word oth, which is equivalent to the prefix re in English, and govel, which is the word taking or seizure, giving us oth govel, which is the word for distraint. So we get this legal term distraint on the process of Ossel's retaking of the cows, this time with their calves, which is actually the proper procedure for distraint. When you distrain cattle, you take the mother's calves with them. To review the story as a whole and look at the various legal elements of it, we start with Fergus giving his legal protection to Echa Belwitha. Echa has killed, or at least severely offended, Dorn's father, Witha, and Echa has sought Fergus's legal protection, but that legal protection is violated when Echa is killed in vengeance for the death of Dorn's father, Witha. In that violation of legal protection, a payment is made in restitution by the killers of Echa. All of them pay Fergus's honor price, but Dorn's son cannot pay and flees. And since Dorn is the person he is legally dependent upon, Dorn is taken as a slave in his stead, as a hostage. So we have this process so far of a legal process, protection, which is violated, and then a payment made in restitution. We then have this supernatural interlude in which Fergus ignores an otherworld warning and violates his oath made to this Lugerpon about not going under a particular lake. And as a consequence, he becomes blemished. It is illegal for a king to be blemished. It is also illegal for a king to violate his oath. And these are going to have consequences down the line. For a while, the Ulstermen get away with not letting Fergus realize that he has this blemish, but eventually things come to light when he mistreats Dorn, a noblewoman of the Faena, who he has taken in as this hostage because she couldn't pay up. And he kills her, which violates the treaty he had made earlier with the Faena of Tara. Because of that violation, they expect repayment, but it isn't forthcoming, so they enact the process of distraint in order to compel the Ulstermen to make good on what they owe for violating the treaty and killing Dorn. They must pay her body fine. What is interesting about the saga of Fergus McLeod is not only that all these legal processes are involved, but also how tricky some of these legal processes are in terms of their application. At the end of the tale, Assel, the son of Conn, is given back the very land he had given to Fergus for violating Fergus's legal protection early on, the 7 covels worth of land that he had paid. He is given that back for Dorn's body fine. There's this full circle element to it. But what this tale is really trying to do is trying to show how to deal with very tricky legal situations that can arise and how to properly deal with them. So it describes how to deal with someone who can't pay for what they owe when Dorn is taken captive in her grandson's place. It shows how distraint should be properly enacted by not just taking the cows that are the value for whatever needs to be paid, but also, in this case, taking their calves with them so that they behave well and so that they don't get super upset and break out of their enclosure. And all of this makes a lot of sense when you learn that the Saga of Fergus is contained within the mid-8th century legal text, the Seneca's Mar, which is a text exactly about these kinds of legal processes and topics. Thank you for listening to Fabula Celtica with Tyler Baxter. Please rate and review our podcast and share it with friends. You can follow us on the site formerly known as Twitter, on Instagram, or on Blue Sky at Fabula Celtica, or you can email us at fabulaceltica@gmail.com.